Thank you for joining us today in this conversation about the next generation of CATI and even beyond that, phone-based research in general. If this is what you still picture in your mind of what a CATI call center might look like, then you have come to the right webinar. We're going to talk about ways that CATI and phone-based research continues to evolve, and ways that you can make your call centers and your CATI operations, your phone-based research operations more efficient and cost-effective. Let's start with the interviewer, which is at the heart of your call center, your CATI operations. This is a picture here of Frederick Winslow Taylor. Some of you might recognize that name. He was one of the pioneers in the scientific approach to management. What he's remembered for is his timing and analysis of workers, especially factory workers, in trying to find how to make them more efficient. So those little details. So while we might take a slightly different approach today, the idea of trying to become more efficient and finding those little seconds here and there are still applicable and can make a big difference. We'll look at some of those numbers here in a minute. I recall personally doing something like this many years ago. I'll show my age just a little bit. I was involved in the transition of a large CATI operation across multiple call centers globally, from a terminal mode-based environment to a web-based environment. So it was a large transition. And one of the things that I did was I actually went to call centers and I watched the interviewers, I watched the supervisors and the quality control folks, how they interacted, how they worked with the technology that we were putting into place. And then I met with them, I talked to them and found out what worked, what didn't work, and through those conversations, through those those interactions, we were able to tailor the system and find ways to make things more efficient and work better for everybody. And that made a really big difference in the productivity. When you're trying to set those things up, one of the other things to think about is how the calls actually flow. So every call center, every business has their own way of handling call flows. It may be your particular point of view. It might be informed by the type of customers that you have, the kind of calls that you're making, the surveys that you're doing. But those shop and client-specific call flows, can make a big difference. So how the calls are made, what the steps are that the interviewers can take, if they're cumbersome, if there's a lot of different screens, if those can be consolidated, if you can automate some of those steps, all of that can make a big difference. I remember being involved in a study in which we were literally looking for 1 second of efficiency in every complete. It was a large study, a lot of calls, a lot of agents involved in it. So small differences can make a dramatic difference in the productivity and at the end of the day, the profitability of the study. And so that 1 second was very, very important. So don't discount what those little changes can mean. Even in screen design, so the colors, the fonts, how the buttons are placed, how the agents interact with the surveys can make a big difference. If you think about a typical call center, maybe 30 seats running on a 6-hour shift, if you can save just half a second on every screen on kind of a standard set of 15 screen survey, at the end of the year, you can easily save close to $10,000. That's a big difference. You should also think about, how the interviewers interact with the survey as a whole, and especially not necessarily just the survey instrument, but what surrounds it, how they get in and out of each of those calls. There are times that there are places that interviewers, as one of my favorite call center managers used to say, they like to marinate. So these are places in the survey where agents may slow down, take time, and kind of lose productivity. Things like your status screens or the screens in between calls and those sorts of things. So looking at where time is going, you can make things more efficient. There are also technical ways that you can make an interview more productive, but also improve data quality. One of those is by recording open ends. So that's something that some folks really like to do, is to record the open ends as opposed to having the interviewers type them. Interviewers tend not to be necessarily the greatest typist. And now with the advent of speech-to-text capabilities, you can auto-transcribe those captured open ends. What this also means is that the respondents are likely to provide greater depth of answers. What we find is that when they know that the interviewer is writing or typing, it's an awkward situation, and the respondents will self-edit themselves and cut their comments short. So by having a natural conversation, you're able to get richer data for your end customer. Again, every second counts. So if you're able to shave just 2 seconds off of the average call time on a study where you're making maybe 30 calls an hour, over the course of a year, you can save roughly $25,000. That's not insignificant. Technology has also allowed us to be able to work from home and have distributed workforces. So having people work from home can reduce those brick and mortar costs. And all of this was sped up, although it's been a trend for quite some time, it was sped up during COVID. And a lot of people moved their workforces to an at-home situation, and some of them have moved back. A lot of folks have remained at home. This also allows people to build their workforces in places with maybe lower cost interviewing. On the screen here, I did a quick Google search. You can tell me if these costs are accurate, but I did a quick Google search to find average cost for CATI workers in different areas. And the cost can be really dramatically different. But it's not just a matter of saving on interviewer hourly rates. It also allows you to find interviewers with the right skills. That might mean having the right language skills, by being able to go into the specific countries and finding those skills. But it also might be something more interesting, like some research I thought was very interesting, that in the United States, if you have an interviewer with a UK accent, you will actually get better response rates. And the inverse is true. In the UK, if you have somebody with an American accent, you tend to get better response rates. So those little things can be interesting and make a difference. Technology has really enabled this hybrid workforce or work from home workforces, or even being able to engage with partner call centers. So by having browser-based solutions that don't require plugins, don't require any special software, and simply just need a browser, you can quickly onboard your interviewers and your partners with minimal effort. It also allows your interviewers to bring their own device, so that you're not having to buy and ship and deploy laptops everywhere, and still maintain security, because both the screens and the voice can be encrypted. Even the phones that the interviewers are using, those can be now embedded within the CATI application, so that you don't have to have any additional software or hardware requirements. I think the number one thing that people think about in terms of improving phone-based research efficiency is the deployment of dialer technology. And in that, I think a lot of people, when they think of dialers, only really think about predictive dialers. But dialers can have a lot of different modes, everything from a manual dial to one click to power, all the way through to full predictive mode. Each of those has their time and place. There are different reasons for using those, both based on the kind of study that you're doing, your target audience, and also potentially regulatory frameworks that might require certain types of techniques to be used. I think it's important that the dialer be integrated with your CATI software, not just an adjunct. A lot of times I think those two are really separate, and you lose out on the ability to programmatically control the dialer and have more sophisticated call flows. And again, those call flows, as we talked about a few minutes ago, can really make a big difference in how efficient the calling and the interviewers can be. Dialers can also give you certain functionality that I think can help improve your efficiency. Things like a caller ID and how you can enable caller ID. One thing that a lot of our customers like to take advantage of is caller ID rotation. So by having a pool of caller IDs and being able to rotate through those, you can help avoid being blacklisted. This can be especially important if you're calling into a very local area with heavy calling. Sometimes the local carriers will see that and think that it is some kind of scam or spam calling and can block numbers. So by having the ability to rotate caller IDs, that can make a difference. Similarly, if you can control your caller IDs by sample record, by programmatic means, you can gain greater efficiency. So, for example, if you're calling a franchise, maybe you're doing research for doctors, getting customer satisfaction work. If you broadcast the local doctor's number, then there's a good chance that number will be in the respondent's contact list and show up that way, which will greatly improve your connect rates. Other options might include something like call routing. This would be allowing you to engage with multiple telcos. If you're doing international calling, for example, you might have different telcos with better rates for different countries. So by being able to route your calls through the correct telco can make significant differences in your overall operational cost. Answering machine detection, that's something that, is, I think, more art than science. There's not a magic switch that tells you that there's a answer machine on the other end. It's actually done through an algorithm that can be tweaked out based on length of pauses and how long somebody's speaking and those sorts of things to try to determine whether there's an answer machine. Being able to use that to drive production, but also that has evolved, and now you can play messages when an answer machine is detected. You can put people into a queue and handle those in different ways. So there's things that you can do there as well. These technologies can also help you be compliant with regulatory frameworks. No technology in and of itself and by itself can make you compliant, but by having different features that you can engage with, you can try to make your shop compliant with things like TCPA here in the U.S., GDPR, or with abandon rates. There are local requirements on abandon rate maximums, things like Carey's Law for physical call centers, all those sorts of things. And at the end of the day, this is going to help you become more productive, more efficient, and drive your profitability. Multi-mode surveys are another way to be able to improve your efficiency. The most common design for multi-mode is web and CATI combined. I think probably within that, the most common idea here is that you start with your web. You might have some phone calls if your sample has some pieces of sample that only have a phone number and no email address, then you can start calling right away. But you start trying to get the bulk of your completes through the web, which is typically a little bit more cost effective than CATI. And then as your fielding goes on, you fill in all the gaps in your quota with your CATI calling. I think a lot of people still believe this to be complicated to set up, but technology has made this much easier to do and also allow you to design surveys that work well in both modes and uniquely in both modes, and to relieve some of the bias that you might be concerned with. Personally, I think that multi-mode designs can actually improve some of the mode bias. Every mode has its own bias, and by combining these modes together, I think it can actually offset some of the mode bias and get you better data results. That's just my personal opinion. It can also give you a chance to validate those modes in those senses. A lot of people today continue to be concerned about the veracity of web panel-based samples, and by being able to make some phone calls and compare those data, you can see if there's significant differences based on the modes. And from that, you might be able to clean your data, weight your data, change your approaches to be able to get better quality data and results. The technology today should allow you to have these designs without having to program everything twice and field everything separately. If that's kind of what is in your mind, is I'm going to have two different surveys and then on the back end mash all my data together. The technology allows you to not do that and to have a single design. But at the same time, those screens, the text that's presented, even the response list items should be able to be mode aware so that you can have the design differences that are required from self-administered web versus interviewer-administered CATI survey. The technology can even allow you to integrate, well, there are some limitations to this, integrate third-party web surveys. So if you have a survey that maybe that you've programmed in a non-CATI tool and you need to make some phone calls to try to fill that in, there are technical solutions there that allow you to use that third-party web survey, but use the CATI system for your calling and sample management. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. When thinking about phone-based research, we've been talking about CATI, the live agent, but there's another option, which is IVR, oftentimes, unfortunately, still referred to as robocalls. IVR mode can be outbound, where you're making calls to the respondent automatically. It can be inbound. Oftentimes that would be where you put a phone number on maybe a receipt and people can call in to rate your service. It can also be used to recruit respondents. So there you start to mix CATI and IVR together. By recruiting people, calling people with a live agent CATI, you can engage those people. I think oftentimes people are a little bit more receptive to talking to a live person than an IVR, so you can get people engaged and then transfer them into the IVR for the survey itself, reducing your costs and making your agents more cost effective and more productive. A bonus to that is that IVR can reduce bias in a couple ways. IVR can reduce that social desirability bias, which is where respondents may tilt their answers in ways they think that the interviewer wants to hear. So maybe they're reluctant to give their full, honest opinions to an actual person, but especially on sensitive topics, but will do so in an IVR situation. It can also help to reduce interviewer bias. So as much as we train interviewers to try to reduce bias, the inflection, the pauses, just the tonality of an interviewer can inject some bias into a survey. With IVR, and today you can use AI-generated voices, which are extremely good, and oftentimes hard to distinguish from a real person. So that can reduce those interviewer subconsciously induced biases. A special case of multi-mode web and CATI is what we call blending. In a call blending situation, you have a live CATI outbound call, and in that case, you may be broadcasting caller ID. So if you think about your operations today, what happens when somebody calls that number back? Oftentimes it goes to nowhere, or maybe just goes to some kind of message or something. I think most of the time it just kind of falls off the face of the earth. However, with call blending, you can route those calls back through an IVR and then decide what you want to do. You could do the entire survey through the IVR, but a great option here is where you route them back into the CATI live agent. So with that, you're able to play a message. If it's after hours, you can say, call me back, or you can even schedule callbacks, those sorts of things. What we find by looking at that is that on average, 7.5% to 8% of your completes can come through this mode. And in certain surveys, and especially those with higher engagement, that number can be 10, even 15% of your completes coming through these callbacks. And what we also find is that of those that do call back, almost 70% convert to completes. So that is a big improvement in your overall productivity. And now I'd like to introduce one of our great customers, Levash from American Pulse. He's the partner and senior pollster, and he's going to talk for a few minutes about how they engage with some of these techniques.
Hello, Alan. Thanks for having me. My name is Lee Vesche. I'm a partner and a pollster with our firm, American Pulse Research and Polling. And we are a multimodal research company. We do political and market research studies all across the United States and have been in business in different forms for 15 years. And we work with numerous elected officials on candidates in Washington, D.C., as well as Fortune 500 companies, law firms, small businesses, academia. We do it all, and we're a Servox customer. Have been working with Alan and his team for over a year now, and have been using their technology. And from the moment we shifted over, it's been very positive for us. So the primary mode that we utilize is live interview surveys. So our interviewers conducting surveys with real respondents over the telephone. That is the kind of the foundation of the work we do, and then we augment our research using text to web, IVR, also using the Servox platform, and occasionally online panel. But primarily, our firm is about doing real interviews with real people, and Servox really helps us to do that. And so we have our call center. We're relatively small, you might say boutique operation. We're unique in that we are pollsters, but also operate our own call center. And we have used different software platforms over the years. CATI, computer assisted telephone interface. We had our own for a while. We've used a couple other providers, and we're now with Servox. And from when we switched to what we have to the Servox platform, it really has been a very positive thing for us. As Alan touched on earlier, just efficiency and those interviewers, right? The most important thing is them talking to respondents, real people answering on the other line. You want that to be occurring as often as possible. And you want to minimize the time where they're just staring at their screen waiting for a call to be connected. And so we've really kind of pushed Servox to the limit in terms of the way that we like to run our projects, but it's working really well, and our cost per interviews are way down. And one of the strategies that we have now is what we call blended mode, where we're making outbound calls to random lists of potential respondents, but then most of our calls go to voicemail. Right? 85% of outbound calls right now go to voicemail. People don't answer unknown calls, but a large number of people will dial that missed call. And so in what we call blended mode, it allows that inbound call, that person that's dialing us back, they got a missed call from us, it puts them right in touch with a live interviewer. And I think presently, of those calls that come in, of our total interviews that we conduct, 7-8% presently are conducted from people that return our call. Well, that just pushes our cost per interview, our CPI, down even further. And I've got some ideas. In fact, I think we can get this even higher with some tweaks to how that process, how the technology works. But we're very happy with that. And it has allowed us to complete more interviews with less interviewer time, costing us therefore less. We can, increase in our profit margin. It's been a wonderful thing. And maybe I'll just close with one thing that Servox really helps us to do is, reaching real people. And so our industry right now, particularly in the political polling space, right, we're just coming out of an election, so there's been lots of talk about polling. There's a big difference in our industry between interviews and sample political polling that is conducted by telephone versus conducted entirely online using online panel. And we are a firm believer in doing real research with real people. And so when we develop our random list of voters that we're going to contact, we know these are our registered voters. We know that likely this is their mobile number that we're calling, and we're able to, this is like a verified real conversation that we are having with an actual voter getting their views. This is very different than what is happening with so much of public polling and research in general that is in the media these days, which is entirely online panel. And the downfall with that is you have absolutely no idea who is conducting that interview. I mean, who you're talking to, who is filling out this questionnaire. And we use online panel occasionally. And there was one circumstance where we needed people only in a specific zip code in a specific town. And we asked the panel provider, only invite people in this town. And we had nearly 10,000 people begin the interview who said, yeah, I'm in this town. I live in this zip code. But we had a blind question. They had to put in the right zip code to proceed. We had 50 people could put in the right zip code. 9,000 plus people lied and said they were in the town, but they didn't actually know the zip code, and so the survey terminated on them. This is online panel. It is the people are doing this for all kinds of different reasons. Often they're getting paid, or they're getting points or rewards. Anyway, I could go on and on about this, but the difference is with what we do is we're doing real research with real people, and therefore our data is a heck of a lot more reliable and accurate when we're doing particularly our political polling, where we're trying to predict the future, and we need to have the right demographics, the right ratios, and on different metrics that we care about. But we know we have certainty, though, that each of the interviews in our sample were with genuine, living, breathing voters, and Servox really helps us to do that in an efficient way, and really actually the best that we have encountered so far in terms of platform. So we're really big fans, and really appreciate the relationship, and look forward to a lot of success here. But thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate those comments. And now to wrap things up, just a little bit about data quality. We talked about some of these things along the way, so phone versus web kind of panel, and how you might be able to use phone to validate, and the other modalities, and vice versa. One of the concerns that I think is starting to develop is that with the advent of AI, that you might find that surveys are being completed by AI robots, and that's going to get harder to detect. So with the web surveys, there are various techniques that people use to try to detect fraudulent surveys. With AI capabilities of answering these surveys, that could become more difficult. So having an auditable survey solution, I think, can really help. So with phone-based research, you can record the calls, you can have live monitoring, you can also monitor through those recordings by listening to them after the fact. The dialer technology and the monitoring technology also allows for interesting things like supervisor tools of barge and whisper. So what that is barging would be maybe a respondent is becoming aggressive with the interviewer, or sometimes what we find is that you call somebody, they may be a little bit lonely and just not want to let the interviewer go, and they're having a hard time disengaging. So the supervisor might be able to break in and nicely and gently break the call and the conversation, let the interviewer get on with their job. Whisper, on the other hand, is a technique where the supervisors can talk only to the interviewer. So the interviewer hears the comments, slow down, speak more clearly, those sorts of things, but the respondent doesn't hear that. So those things can improve the quality and also the overall productivity of your studies. So I hope that I've shared at least one or two interesting things with you. Please feel free to reach out to me at alan.porter@enghouse.com at any time. I'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the conversation.
Thank you, Alan. And now's the time for questions. And I'm going to kick off while people are typing them in. So one of the sweet spots for using CATI is obviously polling, and it's a really hot topic at the moment with the recent elections. What are the other sweet spots where you see CATI used more often?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think CATI is used a lot in just general customer satisfaction work. It's more engaging. You can, actually you become a representative of that brand in that situation. It's also used, I think, more in some of the business to business calls where you're trying to find the right person. So you may not know who that person is, and you have to kind of dig through to find the right manager, the right person with the right skills to answer those questions. So I think that's another great place for CATI to be used.
I'd probably throw geography into the mix there. I've just come back from the APAC conference held in Bangkok with people from all over Asia. We're doing an initiative in Africa. In quite a few of those places, CATI is much more a default than it's become in Europe, for example.
I agree with that. Yeah, we definitely see interest in the Asian markets in CATI research for sure. I think so. You're right. There are cultural differences in those approaches and different methodologies around the world.
So you highlighted mixed mode, combining online surveys, self-administered online with CATI. Can we also merge in postal? Can we merge in face-to-face if people are using things like iPads to collect data?
Right. So, especially if you do online CAPI, kind of face to face. So, most places have Wi Fi capabilities or at least hotspot or cell phone connections to make it pretty easy to do that without having to go through an offline mode. So that's possible as well. Absolutely on the engaging with paper, and then there's various ways to get data enter that, whether it's manual or scanning. There's different ways to get that in there, but that's something where you can offer on the paper survey. You can offer QR codes, you can offer phone numbers that people can call into and use IVR to take that survey, or a URL that they can go to engage with the survey. One of the things that I think is something that people are concerned about is kind of mixing those modes, but you can do things to make the approach, the screens behave like and look like a paper as much as possible and minimize some of that modality bias.
Brilliant. Okay, so a couple of points relating to IVR. The first one is we're seeing a real growth in conversational surveys in terms of self-administered. We're seeing avatars. You talked about some of the wonderful voice things that can be added on. Can you imagine in the near future having AI moderated surveys that are either qual or quant that really take IVR to that next level of pulling the strands together?
Absolutely. There's little doubt that's going to be part of it. So, it starts with a little bit more advanced probing in web surveys, but for open-ended questions. But the leap from that to AI generated probing and conversation is not that far to get to that next stage. So I definitely think that is coming very quickly.
And then the other IVR/AI question is, do we need to tell participants that they're talking to a machine?
That's a great question. Historically, it wasn't too hard to figure out that you were talking to a machine, right? But that, as I mentioned, the voices are getting remarkably good, and with some of the new AI voices, you even have inflection, better inflection, more natural inflections in there, contractions, in the speech that makes it sound more natural. There's a lot of different things that are there. So, I think that might be ethically the right thing to do. And certainly also, again, for some of that bias reasons, it might be a good thing to do as well, so that people understand that, yeah, this isn't a live person. And maybe they are a little bit more honest with their opinions.